we want to talk about the mapping and texture editor within Vizrt. So what I'm going to do is drag a 3D object up here, and we're going to start with a cube. And we'll use a cube because it is a 3D object, and we'll be able to see the different sides and how the mapping and the texture affects this particular object. So I just want to rotate this a little bit so that we can see 2 or 3 sides of the cube, and we'll see a little bit better about what some of these textures do. Now first, if you don't have any images or textures imported into your Vizrt machine, you'll need to do that first. And to do that, you just go into Import, use your little drop down here to look for images, and then you can look for an image, a PNG, TIFF, Targa, pretty much any image type in from an external editor you'll be able to import. So we'll bring this in here. You can see it just imported that image right there. So if we jump back into our default workspace here, and here is our server. So you can see in my server I have images here that I broke up further into other folders, and I have some various images floating around in other folders here that I can use at will. So I'm just going to go ahead and drag one of these images onto here, and then we have a reflection image here. So you can see I just take this and drag it onto my cube, and you can see how this affects it right away. Now bear in mind that every image is going to look different on every object. So depending what 3D object you're using or 2D object you're using and what image, it could completely look different. And even more so once we start changing the texture settings. So for example, we dropped this image on here. If we were to swap it out with another image, we could just drag another image right on top of there and replace it. And you can see how the cube looks totally different now with a different image. So let's go drag the other image back on there, and we'll just play with this one first. So we have the image on here. You can see the icon on the container. If we click on the image icon in the container, it opens up the properties window on the right. And in here is where we can start using our texture and mapping settings to get the desired result we want. First up here we have the image that we dropped on there, and it tells you the name, the width, and how much memory is used in here. If at any point you want to swap out that image, you could just drag another image on top of it like that. Now you notice right below there's an alpha image. So if we were to take an alpha image, a black and white image here, and drag that in there too, we could actually blend these two together or use it as an alpha. And you can see here how that black and white circle has cut a shape within our image. And if you don't want that anymore, you just hit that little symbol there and it gets rid of it. So within our image texture mapping properties here, we have a couple of options. First, we have the image itself, what we just reviewed, and we have the transformation properties here. The transformation properties will allow us to move this on the X and the Y position. We also have a center point that we can move on the X and the Y, and we can also rotate these images on the X, Y, and Z as well. There's also a scaling that we can use to further manipulate it. So you can use the dials on the left or right to get it to the number you need. You can highlight the numbers in here and roll with your mouse. And this little button in the side here just means it's going to reset them all. So we'll just come down and reset all those settings there. Now you also notice we have a single, a locked, and a proportional. Single will just allow us to adjust the scaling on each particular axis. When it's locked, they move together, so you can see how they are locked. And proportional means that if you started out as one smaller and the other larger, you could change it to proportional then, and then they'll stay the same. So we'll just go back to lock and reset them. Underneath transformation, you have the mapping properties, and the mode is always set to linear by default, but these can be changed as well. So we can come down here and change it to vertex, and you see when we change it to vertex that it maps it to every corner of this cube. So as we rotate it here, it's on every side of the cube. If we come back into our mapping textures here, we also have a reflection, and this will change it to a reflection mapping here. And again, we can jump back into your transformation of the image here, and as you adjust the X or the Y or the scaling, you can see how it really changes the effect of this cube. And furthermore, if you come into the transformation axis editor here and either rotate it, move the position, or whatever, you see how much this reflection map here affects this cube. So we jump back into the texture editor here. We also have a spherical mapping, a cylindrical mapping, and also a cube mapping as well. And again, whichever one you have it set to, you can come up and adjust with the transformation properties as well. Let's go ahead and change it back to reflection. So we also have a multi-texturing tool here too. And the way that this works is that if I wanted to use another image to add more texture to this, we could. So for instance, I could drag an image with some texture on it up into our scene tree. I'm going to slide my cube as a subcontainer, and we have a texture unit. I'm going to change that to 2, and we're going to come up and change my top texture unit to 1. And we want to turn on our inheritable yes. And now you can see what happens with the cube is that it inherits both textures. So we spin this around here. You can see it has some of that wood on it. And it also has that reflective blue on it that we put on it earlier. So let's reset that and go into the image editor again with the cube. I'm going to turn that inheritable image off just by sliding that cube out of the container and getting rid of the other one. So back in the image editor here, we have options for quality, and by default it's set to bitmap. We could also change it to pixel, which is a lower quality, and we can also change it to linear too. The images that you use with your textures and mapping will have a huge influence on the real-time rendering of your scenes. So quality and size is something you always want to pay attention to. Now furthermore, down below that we have a blur and a sharpen. And under certain settings, these things will be grayed out, but if you change it to bitmap, you can now change the blur setting and the sharpen setting within it as well. Below that, we also have an effect, a smooth or a mosaic that you can make, an anisotropic filter, which you can change from 2 to 16, and also a compression, which again will help your optimization of your scenes running real time. With the compression, obviously none stands for no compression. DXT5 will add the most compression. However, it may suffer some quality if you do change it to DXT5. Below the quality, we have the environment. So we can make additional changes to our mapping and textures through here as well. By default, it's set to modulate, but we can change it to blend, a decal, there's an add sign, and an interpolate. Now again, each one of these may look a little bit different depending on which image you're using, and what type of geometry you're using in the scene as well. Last setting underneath the image editor here is the stereo, and you have a mode. By default, it's set to none, but you can change it with these 5 different settings there as well.